in the loft process that really makes applying materials much more convenient. What I'm going to do is take just a generic material. Actually, let me go in here and just make a new one. And I'll change the color so that we make sure we got the material on there. If I use a multi-sub-object material for this loft object, I gain a lot more control of what I'm doing here. So I'm going to switch this material that I just generated from a standard material to a multi-sub-object material. And I'll keep the old material as a sub-material. Now I'll do 3 for this example. And I'll just change red, green, and blue. Little formula that you want to keep track of all through Max. RGB equals XYZ equals UVW. They all mean essentially the same thing when you see color information here. Look right here, your tripod. RGB equals XYZ. You go into track view, you got your curves. RGB equals XYZ. UVW are just the next 3 letters in the alphabet that refer to materials as opposed to modeling. Roger's still in here? This looks like Roger's golf pants up here. That's pretty cool. Yeah, exactly. Let me go back to my loft object here. Within the surface parameters information of lofting, within surface parameters, automatically we have generated material ID numbers with this. But we want to turn on this option in the loft object itself to use shape ID numbers to apply materials. So to make this work, first step is go to the loft object and turn on use shape IDs. Notice the color of the object changed. It went from red to blue. It's using the shape IDs. What is the shape? It's this cross-section object over here. I can assign my materials again by coming in here and saying modify at the segment level, and I'll grab this segment here. Let me go from scale to select just so I don't mess anything up. So I have this segment on the shape selected, and I have that use shape IDs turned on. And I come down here to the bottom of my modify panel, and I can say set the ID of that shape segment to 2 or 3. So I apply my materials to parts of the object based on this simple information that I've stored in my segments. You can't imagine the flexibility this gives you in applying materials to extremely complex objects. Very, very powerful tool. Again, I'll come in and I'll say, let's take this segment, and let's assign it material ID number 2. And now I've got my 3 different colors on here. And again, I could come in here and say, this material is not going to be just a solid color, but it's going to be a checker map, for instance. And I want to turn map in viewport. Now, the checker is repeated once. And remember, checker is a black, white, over white, black pattern. So I can come in here and I can use, in my loft object, let me exit sub-object mode here. In my loft object, I can use this length repeat to repeat the pattern over and over and over as it travels along. Now again, if I come over here, if I want this to be a 6-inch checker pattern on this object, a 6-inch checker pattern, what I can do is select my helix, go to Utility Panel, Measure. So there's 1,453 inches. I'm not going to get into all the math here. So I know how many inches it is. Let's say I want it to be, I'll show you a little bit of a trick here. So I come back here and I go into the modify for the loft object. The length repeat, I want it to be each black, white, white, black pattern is going to cover 12 inches. So the number of repeats that I need here, if I wipe over that field and I do a Control N, any numeric field in Max, highlight the number, Control N, and you get this numeric expression evaluator that pops up. And I can say 1453, I think that was the number, divided by 12 gives me 121 points repeats along that line. Now, this while I'm right here, I could say times pi, etc., etc., etc. So you can use math as complex as hyperbolic trig functions. H tangent, those sorts of things, whatever they are, I don't have a clue. But you can use that, separate everything with parameters, and you can type very complex formulas in this thing. That's not what I want. I don't even know what pi is. So, right there, paste, and that gives me my repeat to give me exactly a 6-inch spacing on that. Now, same thing for the other term, except that's based on this. So if I select my original shape, I come over here and I go back to measure, that one's 150 units. The total length is 150 units, even though my checker pattern is only over part of it. So I come back to my loft object, come in here to modify, down here, and I'm going to do it again just to show you. Control N, and 150 divided by 12. Paste that in. Now I've got an exact 6-inch checker pattern. Very, very controllable, very flexible process. Okay? Does that stuff make sense? I'm going along at a pretty good clip here, just so we get ground covered. Does this type of class work for you guys, rather than doing something real fancy and baffling the daylights out of you? I'd rather give you solid information that you can go back and immediately apply to work, rather than give you information that you can go back and scratch your head and think, how'd they do that? So, alrighty. So, shape, ID numbers. You can also, let me show you here. I want to put some hand railings or some railings up on this thing, tubular railings that go around. All I have to do is I have to come in here and say create shapes circle, and right there I'll make a circle. I'll clone that circle over here, and again I'm just roughly positioning these, but I could be aligning them and typing it in and all that. Make a copy. I'm going to come back to this original base shape. That's important. The shape is referenced as rectangle 01, so I want to retain that name for the shape, and I'm going to do an attach process. If I had converted a circle to an editable shape, attached to the circle, the object becomes called circle 01, and I may lose my connection in that referencing or the instancing process. So I select my original lofted object, and I come in here to, where am I? Spline subobject level and attach. Editable spline level. And attach. And I say attach the circle, there's that rail on that side, attach the circle, there's that rail on that side. So I can add to this object as I generate my mesh object. Now those need new materials. Something that I don't have in my material editor. Well, I assign materials based on segment ID numbers. But I can also come in here at spline subobject level, say select that spline right there, control key down, select that spline right there, and change my ID to 4. It goes through the colors. There was that checker pattern. But I go to 4, which I don't have any material number 4 in my editor, but I can assign by the spline number. Then I can go back to my material, come back up to the top level, add a new number, and change the color of that, and that becomes the railing color. Whoop, something different here. Hot pink railings. So again, have we made any 3D objects? No. Do we have a 3D object? Absolutely. Do we have control of it? Absolutely. Now, if I look at the density of this thing, right here, if I look at the density of this mesh object, make sure I'm out of sub-object mode, right-click on it, convert to editable mesh. What would I do that for? If I right-click on it, go to Properties, and I look, we've got 10,548 faces. Can we clean that up at all? Maybe. But before we do it, let's render this thing. Right here. We notice some segmentation going on. That looks pretty chinsy. So I've got 10,500 faces, and it really doesn't look all that great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my shape steps to 0. I'm going to set my shape steps to 0. Does that work? Well, for most of it, yeah. But my railings here become diamonds. There's no longer any intermediate steps between curvature of those 4 vertices, intermediate steps between vertices to define curvature. What do? Add vertices by dividing. Absolutely. So, to regain control of that, I come back down in here, I go to segment level, I grab these segments, and I can probably get away with just dividing by 1 and still have it look okay, but I'll be bold and I'll go to 2. So that adds vertices in there. Now when I render that window, now my railings are back to a circular cross-section. So I reduce the shape itself, and if I check the properties again, let me make sure I got the right object selected here. Come on, get out of there. We've gone from 10,000 to 3,508. So a very, very considerable savings on geometry by dropping the shape steps and adding a couple of extra points. Now I can even add some path steps to get rid of that curvature. And I still have an object that is only half the size. So I've made the thing look much, much better, and I've cut the amount of geometry in half. And like I say, I could have gotten away with simply one shape step, one new vertex with the divide option, and it would have looked fine on this, and we would have been even less dense a mesh object. So, very important process. I'd like to field a few questions. Ask me if we can do forked lofting. Sort of. That's a question that does